Yeah, it's true because there was a moment when we didn't seem to be coming to an agreement. And, Lucy and I kind of looked at each other and went, what are we going to do here?
Mhm.
And what we actually did was we turned to our customers and we
Yeah.
asked them, like, hey, do you mind renewing a little bit early to
Mhm.
buy a bit more time for us? Ultimately, as founders, you need to know what you stand for and what you're willing to give up and what you're not willing to give up. And for me, it's very clear. I come to work leaving my family and my children at
Mhm.
home, at school, to do this. It takes a lot of my time and energy, and I know my time and energy is the most precious commodity I have. And so, if I'm going to put my time and energy into this venture, it needs to be worth my time and energy. And if I'm in a situation where I feel that the terms are going to alter that, then I might as well just go home.
Welcome to Women Disrupting Tech. My name is Dirk Jan Upkes, and on this podcast, I give the women who work in tech the platform they need to inspire and empower each other. Join me on a journey into the world of entrepreneurship, funding, biases, and role models to discover the strategies for success in the tech industry. In other words, how women can disrupt tech. Are you ready to listen? Hey, welcome back to Women Disrupting Tech. Thank you for listening to episode 49. Back in October 2022, I interviewed Quan CEO and co-founder Arosha Brouwer about the importance of employee well-being and about how her startup Quan can help organizations and teams avoid mental health issues due to working conditions. To say that Arosha has been busy since would be an understatement, which is why I wanted to follow up with her to see what her journey as a startup founder has been like. Now, this episode is an absolute masterclass in growth, both personal and as a founder, because we'll talk about the exciting new partnership with a leading occupational health provider in the Netherlands, about the differences between being a founder of a startup and CEO of a scale up, and how to survive a challenging funding environment and doing so on your own terms. Plus, because we recorded this episode on the 8th of March, we'll also discuss what International Women's Day means to her. So please welcome back to Women Disrupting Tech, Arosha Brouwer. So welcome, Arosha. Great to have you on International Women's Day. In fact, for those who didn't listen to the first interview, can you briefly introduce yourself and your company?
For sure. It's so nice to be here again at Dokyan. My name is Arosha Brouwer. That's Australian accent that you can hear.
Yeah.
I'm Sri Lankan by birth. I've been living in the Netherlands now for 17 years. And I am the co-founder of Quan. Quan has been around now for 4 years, and we are a B2B SaaS
Hmm.
software company, and we are focusing on basically helping teams measure and manage their well-being.
Okay. And maybe also good as an introduction because you explained this on the previous episode as well.
Mhm.
Maybe good to explain why this is important. Not only, let's say, to employees, because
Yeah,
obviously it is, but also to employers and to managers of teams.
yeah. Well, there's this statistic which I spoke a lot about last year as well, and I think the stats haven't got any better, which is that 80% of workers have experienced burnout or a mental health issue due to working conditions.
Wow.
So there's just a lot of us that are experiencing all sorts of issues at work. And of course, when people experience these things, they don't do their best work. They're not living their
No,
best lives.
no.
And as you know, the definition of burnout, it's actually there's a large component of it due to workplace stress.
Okay.
And so organizations have got a role to play to ensure that the conditions that they provide their workers are such that the people can do their work properly. And why it's important for employers is obviously when people are in a good state, then they do their best work. So
Mm-hmm.
productivity and all of that is a direct consequence of that. And there's loads of statistics around the cost of it. If people are not in the right conditions in terms of the cost of attrition,
Mm-hmm.
the cost of long-term sick leave, the cost of people that are at work but not
Mm-hmm.
really at work, so they're not really doing as well.
Yeah, they're not
So
productive.
they're not productive, exactly. So the stats are there, and organizations should have a better way of measuring it and managing it.
Okay. So, as just out of curiosity, because there's stress and stress,
Mhm.
there's positive stress that, for instance, I have a bit of stress when I do interviews,
Yeah,
like this one, which
yeah,
is the stress I need to perform. And there's bad
absolutely.
stress that sort of would, well, prevent me from doing the interview properly.
Yeah.
How do you manage that balance?
Exactly. I mean, that's a really good point. And what I would like to point out is stress is one subdimension of well-being, and there's more
Hmm.
than 250 predictors, right, of
Oh,
well-being.
okay.
So, and indeed, stress can be both positive and negative. But why it's interesting to have a way to have more of a holistic understanding of your overall well-being is not just looking at stress alone,
Mm-hmm.
but if you were, so with Quan, we have an assessment where it covers 5 dimensions and 43 subdimensions. When you do
Yeah.
it, it might say to you, hey, Dirk Jan, you've rated yourself as sort of having a high level of stress. But what's interesting is that you've also got high levels of anxiety and low levels of concentration next to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's step one, creating awareness. But then
Yeah.
step two is like, okay, what might be causing that? Like what's happening in my life?
Yeah.
And it's only when you get down to that level that you might unearth that it's financial insecurity, or it's, like a toxic situation with the team, or
Mm-hmm.
it's lack of unrealistic expectations, that's causing all these things at once. And that's actually what you want to address. So it's not per se thinking about, is it positive stress or negative stress, but actually, what are the things that's making me uncomfortable? And can I unpack what that is and what can I do about it to improve it?
Okay. Is that also what makes one different from other employee well-being services? That you
Yeah.
actually give people the data to go on that discovery?
That's true. So there's two parts that makes Quan
Mm,
quite unique. The first part I've kind of hinted at, which is the framework. So
mm-hmm.
we've probably got one of the most holistic and science-based frameworks of well-being out there in the market.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite broad and deep. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it looks at aspects of mind, body, meaning, self-fulfillment, social connectedness, and two layers underneath that.
Yeah.
And we look at both personal life and work life. So when someone does an assessment, they get a real good feel of, okay, these are the things that I need to work on. But what makes Quan also very different to others is we're not focusing on the individual, we're focusing on the team. And the reason for that is there are so many wonderful applications out there that are designed to help an individual go and, do things for themselves. But quite
Mm,
often, we see in a work context is the problem is it with the group of people that are doing the work. So what Quan does is we aggregate the results to a team level,
mm-hmm.
and then we help the team unpack that, and we match them with better ways of working or interventions to then as a group address the key problem areas. And what we found last year is that
Mm-hmm.
on average,
Yeah.
teams that use Quant improve those subdimensions by about 25 to 30% within 12 weeks. Yeah.
That's quick and that's a lot, I would say.
Exactly. Yeah. And the total time investment for a team to do an assessment and have this kind of team retro is what we've developed. Um, is a total of 1.5 hours in 12 weeks. So it just goes to show, if people know what's actually like the problem, the people have a space to unpack it, and of
Mhm.
course more data, which we provide, and a clear structure to identify actions, amazing things happen.
Yeah. Um, I I was wondering, just because I had recently had a discussion about creating safe spaces. Is this also part of that?
100%, exactly. So we are all about helping teams create that safe space, but also giving them data and guidance on actually discussing what needs to be discussed at a deeper level than,
Yeah.
if you just have a group of people and you just talk about a superficial stuff, you don't always get to the heart of what's happening. And
Yeah.
that's where the technology helps, right?
So do you then also advocate that teams should have a sort of, how do you embed this data into regular team meeting structures? So how do you do this as part of your weekly retro, or do you do this as a separate meeting maybe?
That's another great question. So basically, what we discovered. Now, we worked with more than 300 teams last year,
Mm-hmm.
and we typically work with what we would deem as white collar knowledge workers.
Yeah.
They're very busy.
Yeah.
And the reason why a lot of daily apps, people are really like gung ho at the start, and then suddenly no one's using it, is it just is another distraction. So with
Yeah.
one, what we typically do is we work with a department, or we work with an organization in HR, and it's a workflow which happens usually once a quarter, or in
Mm-hmm.
some cases just twice a year. And so it's a moment where the team do an assessment, and then they meet up, and then they go do, right? And then they know this is only 2 hours every 12 weeks, or every 6 months, or whatever the time frame is.
Ah, okay.
And that's the trick. And so Juan will then uh, the key thing is that the team commit to an action, which they then do after that retro. But that
Mm-hmm.
action is not clicking on the Quan app. That action is, hey, we've introduced a new prioritization system, or hey,
Yeah.
we've introduced a new exercise thing that we're doing as a group. And that is what leads to that improvement.
So there is, let's say, uh, weekly work to be done, but it
Mhm.
starts with, let's say, quarterly or semi-annual retro, where you just look at the results of the assessment and see where the
Yeah,
problems are,
yeah,
and then you focus on, you get solutions or
yeah.
solution directions from
Yes.
Quan,
Yep.
and then you start executing on those, and that I assume will need follow up in, well, daily, weekly, monthly meetings.
Depending on it. So in
Yeah.
larger organizations, what we find is that they already have a lot of stuff. They have
Yeah.
really good psychological safety courses, or they have, all sorts of L&D programs. And sometimes our system allows you to upload those sorts of internal offers. And
Mhm.
sometimes a team just says, okay, that's what we want to undertake. So one can then help assess the efficacy of that, right? And we have situations where, in one particular customer, psych safety was the lowest scoring sub-dimension for that team.
Mhm.
And the manager ended up doing a course recommended by HR,
Uh-huh.
and it improved by 70% the next cycle.
Oh,
So,
yeah, that's,
so it's really interesting, these sorts of insights.
yeah. I want to switch gears a bit because you recently closed an exciting new partnership. Um, can you tell us a bit more
Yeah.
what the partnership is about and what it means to Quan?
Yeah, for sure. So we will be partnering with Zorg van der Zaak, which is
Mm-hmm.
the Netherlands' largest Aberdeenst or occupational health provider.
Yeah.
And Zorg van der Zaak are working on an exciting new platform, of which they'll be releasing more information as time comes. But uh, Quan will be providing the wellbeing data analytics layer, as well
Oh.
as our team intervention that I talked about will also be available on that platform. which is just super exciting because Zorg van der Zaak has more than 1.5 million employees that they help. I think it's 60,000 employers. And so, it means that when this platform of Zorg van der Zaak is made available, then you also get access to Quan through that, and that's exciting for us.
Yeah, that's a great distribution also of your service then into where it really matters, because ultimately, at least in the Netherlands, you will see most of the negative consequences of a lack of employee well-being in the indeed occupational in the occupational space. So
Yeah, and I think
services like Zorg van de Zaak and uh, yeah, Arbodienst,
yeah,
they're called more in general.
yeah.
Uh,
And
so
I
yeah.
think that's what excited me the most. Obviously, we met with the CEO and a board member, and I think what really stands out, and advisors, of course, of Zorg van der Zaak and the team, is that this is an organization which is very much aligned with the Quan values,
Yeah.
which is
Hmm.
we really care about creating systems and processes to help organizations be a better place for
Yeah.
people. And they are taking that step forward. They are also very interested in the science and just as us, and they are very interested in interventions and seeing behavioral change. And I think for us, that was key.
Hmm.
And so we're very excited because we have, of course, a very smart and fast moving team, and we've got 4 years of research and
Hmm.
the platform, and they've got distribution and
Yeah.
customers that have the need. And so
Yeah.
it just was a very good match.
Yeah. How did you start this? How
Yeah.
how does this type of thing start? Do you meet on a event, or how did they approach you?
Well, I think this is a really important topic that, I've come to learn through my entrepreneurial journey, Turkey, which is
Hmm.
it's not always about uh, the product that you build or,
Hmm.
how hard you work. Sometimes it's about the people you know. And I
Yeah.
think, especially when you want to grow an organization, founders need to make that switch from just looking inward to looking outward and spending more time connecting. And in our case, we just happen to have an angel investor that had a connection to Zorg van der Zaak, and this specific angel investor had been following the path that Quan had taken for 4 years, knew what Zorg van der Zaak needed to build, and sort of made that
Mm.
introduction. And so it was just a huge eye-opening moment for me as well. And
Yeah.
of course, it took some months. No one signs a partnership because someone introduced you.
Yeah.
It always comes down to what you've built, but the answer is a connection. It was not a cold outreach. It was not randomly meeting someone at an event. It was an investor that knew both parties that made that connection.
Well, that's also a valuable thing for an investor to do.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is also one of those things where, I talk very openly about how important it is to be conscious and aware of who makes up your cap table.
Hmm.
Um, and what we have a really good set of investors, some of which are more active and helpful than others. I mean, it's always the case.
Hmm.
But angel investors, you can ask any founder that some of your angels are actually for building the business, the ones that make the most valuable introductions, because typically these investors uh, are ex-founders, or you've picked them because they know your space and they know people in
Hmm.
your space, and they're just opening doors, right? And that's really valuable at the stage that we're in.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, so one of the things you learned is that it's not just about the product, but also about the connections that you can build and that others can build for you. Uh, one of the things I remember from when we talked the first time is that you told me that being a startup CEO requires different things, different capabilities, let's say. Um, from being a scale up CEO. So I was wondering what other things you learned in the past year and a half, and how you experienced that transition.
Yeah, that's a really I love that question. Because, I probably have a little bit more experience a year later. So as a startup CEO, it's typically, it's not so much CEO, it's founders, right? So it's Lucy and I, we're doing a lot of different stuff together. We've got
Mm-hmm.
a cool sort of founding team. Everyone's in it, but we're sort of we laugh that, Lucy was the chief product officer, chief operations officer, chief financial officer, uh, and I'm the commercial officer, etc. But when you become, or when you start to sort of become a scaler,
Yeah.
then it's no longer the story of the founders or the vision of the founders. It's literally like how good your product is, and uh, are you able to have a repeatable sales motion, or can the product potentially service thousands, and so then it no matter how good you are as founders, it's not just the two of you. So you really need to delegate,
Yeah.
and so and delegate starts with bringing on the right people. Sort of letting go, trusting. And so, what I've learned is that it's super important to hire. At this stage, it's still very much about doers,
Mm-hmm.
right? You'll have a lot of people that are like consultants or advisors that are really well-meaning, but we don't have that luxury. We actually need people that are very, very good at leading but doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so having uh, that becomes incredibly important as a scale up, sort of scale up. But then as a CEO, um, you it's a little bit more to that point that I made earlier. It is about outward looking, right? It's you really need to make connections. You need
Mm-hmm.
to think beyond that first year to, okay, what's what's at that horizon, who
Yeah.
are the people that I might need to connect with that could help, maybe not now but in the future, and those sorts of things become more important, which means I need to free up some of my time and mental space for that.
Yeah.
And so I've had to then carve out and give people, like, hey, like, you run with this and involve me rather than me sort of being there constantly, right?
Yeah.
And that's been interesting. And I've received the support of our investors for that as well, saying, yeah, this is the moment. And it works for me because I'm an extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
So I love meeting new people. So I'm kind of excited to do more of that this year.
Yeah. So about the hiring, because you hired new team, new people on the team,
Yeah.
uh, and you're hiring doers.
Mhm.
Um, but you also had to let go of some people.
That's
How
true.
do you do that? And I'm especially also interested in how you do that in the space of employee well-being, because if
Yeah.
you let people go, it impacts the team,
Yeah.
especially the
100%.
people who quote unquote are left behind.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's a single founder that enjoys this, because, especially in the early stage, you are in the trenches with your team.
Yeah,
And your team, you should never make analogies to family, when you're building a company, but it really can feel like that. So
yeah,
at Quant, we obviously use our own product, and we take well-being very seriously. And I think that, you can literally contact any one of our team members that was let go, and I'm pretty sure they'd say the same thing, because I'm connected still with some of them, which is, we were extremely transparent,
hmm,
and we made it very, very clear why decisions were being made. There was especially for an early stage company, there should be no black box to this. It should be made very, very clear. This is the condition of where we're at. This is the direction that we need to take. These are the consequences of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to have some level of grace and empathy when you're delivering the message, and have time for that person to still connect with their team, to still connect with you,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to have that two-way conversation. And then for me personally, I made it a point to check in afterwards to make sure that our team landed somewhere. And I think that for me was just very, very important. And the byproduct of that was, you can still connect with any one of the people that have sort of left,
Mm-hmm.
and an honest and good conversation, but also the team that stayed were motivated afterwards because they
Okay.
saw the grace, right? And they saw the honesty, and they saw the difficulty that we had as founders. And I think that process that we took, are very data driven, transparent, open, and sort of process that we took. I would do that again if I have to do this again. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah, let's
So
not hope you get there again, because
it's terrible.
it's never easy, and it doesn't get easier, to be honest.
No, but I mean, last year
Yeah.
it so many companies. It's one of the worst. What was it? Isn't it the worst tech bust there has been? And so you just saw so many startups and scale ups not
Yeah.
survive. You saw so many giants not survive, and you hear different ways and stories of how people have done it.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily for us, Lucy and I have got 15 years work experience prior to starting Quan. So we have both received the news as well as seen our team members receive the news. So we had a little bit of an understanding. And there was a way that we wanted to take it. And it was
Did you
never about individuals and more about the situation that we were in.
Okay. So the two of you then also discuss, like, okay, this is the plan of approach. This is how we're going to run this,
That's it.
in a business like but empathetic
100%.
way.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we had a team discussion about it, right? So the
Okay.
entire
Yeah.
team were present, and we sort of outlined it after every single person had been notified. And then we created a moment for people to ask questions. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, Quan has a high level of psychological safety just by the very product that we're
Mm-hmm.
building. You'd expect
Yeah.
that. And people were able to ask honest and open questions. And if they felt that they didn't want to ask it in that forum, they could also approach us individually. And we made sure that there were no questions, right? Like, because nobody wants like this feeling of, oh, but was it this? Nobody wants that if you're the person leaving. Nobody wants that if you're the person staying. And we wanted to make sure it's very clear that this is the direction thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like, let me also add to the factor again that this was when we were trying to close the round, which just seemed like was slipping away from us. And my mother-in-law died,
Oh.
literally in that week. So it was really tough time. It was a space of like 2 weeks. But you know what's strange about that is that moments like that, when you lose a loved one, is the moment when everything is very, very clear about what's important in life, right?
Yeah.
And so ultimately we're building a product for people. There's no point building a product for people if you don't care about the people that are helping you build your product, right? So
Yeah.
it started with, how do we treat our own people that are here right now, that have been working so hard, and
Mm-hmm.
that was super important to me, and still to this day is.
Yeah. I think that's also, part of your strong points,
Yeah,
to be honest.
yeah.
That you
Thank you.
actually do care about, the people, and not just about the product. A question that I was wondering about, because in the first interview you told me that to use a startup analogy, you're eating your own dog food, so
Yeah,
you're actually using your own product,
yeah,
so Quan product.
yeah,
How did you see this whole process in the data back, and also
yeah.
let's say in a bit longer term?
Yeah, well, we saw during the, eh, so we use Quan every quarter, and
Mm-hmm.
we're still a small team, so we have the platform team and the commercial team, and um, it's so talking about my commercial team, like we just had during that time high levels of stress at work, uncertainty at
Uh-huh.
work, um, um, and what was really sad was um, for the first time in Quan's history, optimism at work came as low. And it's an obvious one, right? And it would have
Mm.
been easy just to say, yeah, okay, difficult to raise. We've just let people go. That's the reason. But because of the retro, we had the deep conversation. And it turned out we selected uncertainty at work as the topic that we
Mm.
wanted to talk about. But it turned out the uncertainty at work was actually not caused by the the macro, the funding or the people leaving. It turned
Yeah.
out it was because individuals actually didn't know what they should prioritize and focus on so that they can help us get out of the situation. They're like, there's so much to do. Like, what should we be doing? And I
Yeah.
was just like, oh my God. Like, if I had just purely looked at the data, I would have just sighed. And so what happened was the actions we decided to take was actually being much more clear on the few things that we are working on. We changed our one-on-one structures, we changed our weekly structures, and uncertainty at work improved by actually 30% in Q1 this year. And those structures still are there, and we're actually
Mm.
further enhancing it because uh, this time it was stress at work, and it came down to again more clarity on stuff. So, this is how we use it, right?
Yeah. You already hinted at it. You closed, or you were raising funding.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you've actually closed that funding
Mhm.
in, I think, one of the most difficult funding climates in the past years. Uh, how how was that? How did you achieve it? How did you close the round? And do you have any tips for early stage startups, startup
Yeah.
founders, how to do it?
Yeah, it was a tough market. I think, speaking to my fellow founders, it was not easy. Um, we started to raise in April and we closed in December, right? Um, so it's a bridge round.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it came down to traction, right? I don't think if you had already raised and you were raising again, you needed to show traction. I don't think there's a single company out there that raised money on vision for the second time.
Yeah.
And so, I've got and in terms of who joined that round, it was our existing investors, including, For Impact, Hearst Lab, YC, and they
Mm-hmm.
all invested, all of the major ones. So, um, and the reason is they could see the improvements and they could see the traction and they could see where this company is headed towards. And
Yeah.
as a CEO, I think my job was to try and get the best terms, of course, for our company. And I think that was just a lot of conversations, um, also explaining why I couldn't accept certain terms.
Yeah,
Um,
because you told me when we spoke at the Hague Tech that you at some point just said, well, no, not only at my terms.
yeah,
How do you do that discussion? Also, because at some point there's like pressure mounting.
yeah, of
Other people get
course.
really scared, maybe people in the team, but also maybe other investors.
Yeah, it's true because there was a moment when we didn't seem to be coming to an agreement. And, Lucy and I kind of looked at each other and went, what are we going to do here? Um,
Hmm.
And what we actually did was we turned to our customers and we
Yeah.
asked them, like, hey, do you mind renewing a little bit early
Mm-hmm.
to buy a bit more time for us? Ultimately, as founders, you need to know what you stand for and what you're willing to give up and what you're not willing to give up. And for me, it's very clear. I come to work leaving my family and my children at
Mm-hmm.
home, at school, to do this. It takes a lot of my time and energy, and I know my time and energy is the most precious commodity I have. And so, if I'm going to put my time and energy into this venture, it needs to be worth my time and energy. And if I'm in a situation where I feel that the terms are going to alter that, then I might as well just go home. And I made that very clear.
Yeah.
And I think that Lucy and I, after 3 years or four, now it's 4 years, have proven that we are the ones that are willing to do the hard work, that
Mm-hmm.
we are committed to building a product that truly changes behavior, that we're not trying to just create software to sell. We're not
Yeah.
interested in becoming billionaires or even millionaires. We're trying to create a product that's going to change the world. That's why we get up in the morning, and we need the means to be able to do that. And if we're not able to do that, and we're not able to flex and build the company that the way that we want with the people that we want, then we could get much higher paying corporate jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you kind of articulate it that way, funny things happen. It turns out that people respect you a little bit more.
Yeah, is it actually because you managed to show traction because there were renewals, early renewals, so
Yeah,
that's probably an upside. But
yeah.
is it also the willingness to lose? To say okay, if it's not on my terms, it's just yeah, maybe then it's not this venture.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between arrogance and um, just being really pragmatic and real.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at no point was I trying to play games. I was just being very real. I know what my boundaries are.
Yeah.
I'm extremely self-aware, and and
Mm.
and so you're not negotiating for the sake of negotiating. You just know
Yeah.
where your boundaries are, and I have that in with most relationships, but certainly with my investors, because ultimately I respect them and I want this to succeed for them as much as for my customers and for our team. Um, but we are building the business,
Yeah.
right? And it's my job and Lucy's job to dictate what we need and what we're willing to do and set those terms. And so um, we do it with strong advice. We have very good advisors, and we're doing that on behalf of our team and potential of this company. She has great potential, and we are responsible, right, for that.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to protect that and outline the terms that we need in order to achieve that. And I think that's what we were doing. So where so that's that's that.
Okay. Um, so it's International Women's Day today. We record on the day we record this. Uh, what does International Women's Day mean to you?
International Women's Day. Well, for me, it's a day to recognize all the amazing women of the past, present, and future.
Yeah.
The ones that have done something, little or big, to help another woman. You've done something in spite of the conditions, to 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 make it easier for another woman. And when I say that, you know, it goes from pioneers, right? And we know the pioneers that have been fighting for our rights, and happens everywhere, to that Sri Lankan mother somewhere in some town, somewhere in some rural part of Sri Lanka that is standing up against her family to say, my daughter deserves her education. And my daughter is not going to marry young because she's going to do something with her life. It spans
Yeah.
that entire gamut, right?
Hmm.
And for me personally, it's all the people that have had an impact in my life, starting with my mother and my sister, my beloved Lucy, my co-founder, and all the other women that have just played an incredible role in getting me to this stage that I'm at.
Amen.
Hmm.
Um, I have two more questions left. Thanks for the
Sure.
interview so far. I have an arrangement with Jacqueline van den Ende, one of my previous guests, to make this podcast irrelevant or obsolete by the end of 2032. What would be your expert advice to make that happen?
I mean, when that happens, we won't see gender, right? I mean, we just won't notice the difference.
Hmm.
In order for that to happen, yeah, there's a whole lot of learn. There's whole lot of things that people have learned because of the structures and systems around us, and that's the way they've been taught. So we need to create new structures and systems that evaluate people and uh, in a different way, um, starting from the schooling systems to making pay equal. There's a whole bunch of stuff. As individuals, we need to demand more.
Hmm.
And I'm talking about women. We need to demand more about what we're worthy of, and we need to start calling things out, publicly and privately. When you're at home and your husband sort of says something, which could be a little bit, say something,
Yeah.
right? If you're in a meeting and someone says something which could be a little, say something.
Hmm.
And I think if we all do that a little bit more, we're going to start chipping away, which is already happening. You can already see
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
And then we'll have different problems we need to solve.
Yeah, of course. But there's another podcast for that. So thank you very much. Really appreciated this conversation, Arosha Brouwer. Where can people learn more about you and about Quan?
Of course, thank you. So our website is www.quanwellbeing.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and of course, Dirk Young. So connect with him to connect with me. Thanks.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds like a great place to wrap. Thanks for the interview, and listeners, thank you very much for listening to this episode of Women Disrupting Tech. Well, that's a wrap for episode 49 of Women Disrupting Tech. Arosha and I hope that you've enjoyed our conversation and that you find it as inspiring as we wanted it to be. To learn more about Arosha, about our company Quan, and about their exciting new partnership with Zorg van de Zaak, I invite you to check the links in the show notes. And this is also where you can find the link to our first conversation in episode 3. As usual, you can find the show notes at womendisruptingtech.blog. On that same website, you can also become a member of the Women Disrupting Tech community. As a member, you get exclusive access to Women Disrupting Tech events, and you're the first to learn when new episodes or blogs come online. When you're a woman who's considering a career in tech and you're looking for a role model to inspire your own hero's journey, please check out one of the other 48 episodes of this podcast on Spotify, Apple, and Goodpods. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, would you consider giving the show a rating or a review? That way you help other people discover the podcast too. Now, if you're a male ally and you want to help Arosha and the other 47 Women Disrupting Tech make this podcast obsolete by the end of 2032, there's a simple thing you can do. Please share the podcast with friends, family, and coworkers because this way you give Arosha and my other guests the platform they need to make it happen. Finally, if you want to connect with me, reach out via email dirkjan@womendisruptingtech.blog or reach out on LinkedIn. Just look up my name, Dirk-Jan Hupkes, and you'll find me. With that, I wish you a wonderful day. I hope to see you in the next episode. And in the meantime, keep being awesome.